Well, good morning. My name is Patrick Woodcock. I'm the president and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us. Really, we wanted to impress upon the public that the Maine economy is entering a new chapter. For the last 4 or 5 years, Maine has had state gross domestic gross domestic product that has exceeded the national average. We've had in-migration. Our economy has become more resilient, but there are warning signs. The last consensus economic forecast projects a downward shift for employment in 2026 and 2027. Previously, it was signaling that there would be anemic employment growth. At this point in 2026 and 2027, the state is projecting that there will be no employment growth for 2 years. Further, there are underlying challenges that Maine needs to address. We have had one of the highest appreciation of home values in the country that has put pressure on those who are just trying to make ends meet with meeting a mortgage or meeting rent. Moreover, for the broader economy, that makes it more challenging to find a workforce to grow a business. Housing needs to be unlocked in our state if we were going to have a growing economy. Maine's population last year was one of the slowest growing in the country. If we want to have a growing economy, we need a workforce to support it. In addition, while the Maine State Chamber of Commerce is supportive of a paid family medical leave program, it needs to work for employees, employers, and the state's economy. We should be integrating best practices from other states, 12 other states that have a paid family and medical leave program that is operational. As it's currently written, this program unnecessarily harms our businesses that are trying to make their business work with a very short labor force. The time to act is now. And lastly, we're very concerned about legislation that passed from the Judiciary Committee on Friday that would put Maine as an outlier on utilizing digital tools to reach customers. It is imperative that small businesses have the ability to do targeted advertising that has become a uniform pathway to meeting and accessing new customers. With that, we have business leaders and experts with us today to go through those details. I wanted to turn to somebody to get us started who is on the front lines of trying to make housing, build housing to work for our economy, and that's Elliot Chamberlain with Chamberlain Homes. Elliot, would you please introduce yourself and give a snapshot of how difficult the way it is currently to build housing in the state of Maine?
Thank you, Patrick. Great opening. My name's Elliot Chamberlain. I own Chamberlain Homes, based out of Saco. We've been doing housing and land development since the early 90s, and have seen a lot of challenges and pressures come upon us over the last decade. As Patrick said, there are a lot of you have probably heard a lot of the issues going on in the state about the need for more housing and how difficult it can be. Some of those difficulties, when we break it down to the local level, local planning boards, state agencies, planning boards take far too long to get things done. A lot of times these planning boards are volunteers throughout the community. Some of them don't even have any background in land planning, land management, development of any type. And a lot of times people are on planning boards for completely the wrong reasons. State agencies, specifically DEP, DOT, to get those agencies to get through the permitting process takes far too long. For example, we happen to be applying for a DOT amended permit, not even a new permit, just an amendment of an existing permit. We're looking at 14 months from start to finish just to get the amendment, and nothing can get approved until that amendment is in place. To give you an example, DEP is vastly understaffed and takes far too long for even the simplest of matters. Can be 3 to 6 months, literally just to get a sign off on something that is fairly standard. When you go through the process in these cities and towns, the impact fees and the work that's being asked of developers, especially of some of the larger projects, which is exactly what we need in this state. We're never going to get to where we want doing 5 and 10, 20 lot subdivisions. We need much larger projects. And when you start getting into those size projects, it's the items that are being asked of us are getting greater and greater outside the projects, whether it's sidewalks, fixing intersections that already have problems, dealing with traffic issues that already exist, and you happen to be the last one at the gate, so a lot of it gets put on you. Impact fees for other things in the cities. And if you go around to different cities and towns, you'll see a wide range of impact fees, from recreation to open space, to a reserve fund for future items the town may want to put in. That list is growing and growing. Building caps. There's a town in southern Maine that has building caps in a growth area, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Couple of other items that we don't have as much impact on, or can just change overnight. Obviously, interest rates are a little bit higher than we've seen over the last decade. That obviously is not something we can change probably at the state level. Labor. Labor has gotten a little bit better, but it's been very tough over the last decade, and we could certainly use more people in the construction industry if we're there again, going to come close to the numbers that the state report puts out in this 80,000 homes. And one item that a lot of you have heard about is NIMBYism. You know, 8, 9, 10 years ago, I thought maybe it had subsided. My opinion now is it's actually gotten worse. And I have said before to a few people, I feel like it's gone from not in my backyard to not in my town or city. People are actually getting up and fighting sometimes any project that goes before the local jurisdiction in their community. And that needs to stop. I think there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways to combat those issues, but those are some of the major issues facing us to bring larger projects to the forefront. And that's whether it's single family homes, affordable, multifamily, tiny homes. We're having those issues no matter what the type of the project is.
Thank you, Elliot. Thankfully, there's been a state report to provide a long-term strategic policy plan to build housing that really is strangling the Maine economy. Elizabeth Frazier is executive director of the Maine Real Estate and Development Association. Elizabeth, could you give an assessment of that plan to really unlock housing in our state?
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. And just to clarify, I'm actually their policy counsel for Maine Real Estate Development Association. But yeah, so, you know, Maine is very fortunate that we have had some support in the past from both the legislature and the current administration. And that support was both financial and in terms of doing the necessary research to get some of these facts in front of the legislature. And we were really lucky that that report led to what's called the HRNA report, led to a really remarkable roadmap of potential solutions to address Maine's housing crisis. And they really run the gamut from, you know, low-hanging fruit items, making sure that all the units, that up to 4 units can be built on a parcel, and rather than having to go through subdivision, all the way up to things like a housing resolution dispute board, which would take on some of these NIMBY issues that Elliot was just discussing, and everything in between. And so this current legislature has a unique opportunity to look at those recommendations, which are grounded in commentary, feedback, and research here on the ground in Maine. This was not just sort of, you know, a national blueprint situation. This was a group that came in, met with a lot of stakeholders in Maine, looked at the need, looked at our existing laws, and looked for ways to, accelerate housing development at all levels, from both affordable to luxury and everything in between. And in particular, what we're referring to as attainable housing, which is, affordable housing that isn't subsidized. And we think the HRNA report, which is the roadmap to Maine's housing future, is eloquently named. It is a roadmap, and we hope that this current legislature will follow it. And I would say that from our perspective, there's a little bit of a sense of urgency that so much good research has been done, and that we don't want to miss the boat on enacting these, in a lot of cases, very attainable policy changes that can move the needle on housing creation sooner rather than later, because in a lot of ways, the economic situation, the labor situation, it's unlikely to improve soon, but we do need housing units built soon. So we would certainly encourage the legislature to look at the HRNA report and to take that seriously, and the legislative initiatives that followed on to it, which would enact many of the recommendations of the report.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I couldn't agree more. There's urgency. At the beginning of the year, we were hopeful interest rates would subside, unlock the economics of housing. However, a lot of these are regulatory barriers. And one individual who's an expert on both the legislative process and the task of really building Maine housing is Matt Pouliot, of Pouliot Real Estate. Matt, could you give us your assessment of the legislation that may be able to move the needle, and what the legislature really should come together to pass in the remaining weeks to unlock housing in our state?
Sure. Thank you, Patrick, for the opportunity to speak with this group. And I'm joining you from my vehicle in downtown Skowhegan, where I'm attending the Build Maine event, which is just literally got done talking about this exact topic and what we need to do to help unleash housing in the state of Maine. And we're fortunate that the Speaker of the House is very passionate about creating more housing in our state and understands the need for that, having experienced some challenges himself with trying to get into new housing. And at the core of the ask here, as Patrick outlined in the beginning, is the fact that we need to utilize housing as a magnet to attract economic development, because we live in a nomadic culture now, if you will. We have tech nomads who can live anywhere, and why not live in Maine? It's a beautiful place to be. Well, why not? Because I don't have a home to go to that I can actually afford the price tag on. And what happens oftentimes, and you heard this from Mr. Chamberlain, is that the people that show up at the planning board meetings or are discussing issues around zoning or changing things in the state, it ends up being not a situation as much as don't go here from people who don't have a home. Those folks are not showing up. We're not even hearing from them after they graduate from college to say, hey, I'm not there because I couldn't find an affordable place to live. We're hearing from the people who already have homes. And it's a situation of people with homes versus people without homes. And what happens often is the zoning code that is in place, which is embedded in these text files that generally gather a lot of dust on shelves, is that people don't understand that because it says at this corner lot, you must have 2 parking spaces, a developer like Mr. Chamberlain won't actually build anything there because the math on it doesn't add up. And so what needs to happen is there needs to be more density, and bills like LD 1829, which is a piece of legislation working through the legislature right now, which some might look at face value and say, why does it matter if the lot size can't be more than 5,000 square feet? Well, because if you do that, the math doesn't work if you require more. The other thing is it's expensive to do this. When you have people spread out in urban sprawl situations, because we've built parking for people instead of building housing for people, we've built around cars, is that you have more infrastructure requirements that are then paid out by fewer people. So when you can encourage density, which these types of legislation going through right now do, and also help with certain ability to build more on smaller pieces of land, then you have more people that are paying for that sewer pipe that's going through the line and the water line. And so all of this to say is that you have a situation in which where you increase density, you also increase the property tax value of that piece of acre of land. And so when we can do this in different cases, you're generating more property tax revenue per acre by having more density, and also you're reducing costs for people, everybody in the community, because you have more people that are able to support that infrastructure that's already there. And this is a big problem for Maine. I mean, we're among the oldest in the nation, and largely as a cohort, baby boomers in America are sitting on $14.9 trillion worth of like real estate equity. And, you know, in this environment where interest rates are the way they are, they're stuck, they're rate bound or they're equity bound. They're not willing to give up that equity for something else, you know, like trade their 3,000 square foot home for 1,500, even though they're just living there alone, because they're like, I'm not paying 3 times as much for what, you know, my house is for that. And it's the cost to build is a function of, you know, what we can use with our land and density and all this kind of stuff. So at the core is reducing costs. And the way to do that are with some of these regulatory changes, which are kind of at odds with the way we've evolved as American people. It's bigger is better, always. That's the American way. But sometimes better is better. And you have to like focus on, all right, what are the fundamental changes that will move the needle on one important thing, which is the math. There was this guy that ran for president. He wasn't very successful, but he had a cool shirt. It said math. It was Andrew Yang. And it comes down to that. If it doesn't pencil out, nothing gets built. Then you don't have the $1,300 a month apartment for somebody to be able to move into with their starter job. And even for some, 1,300 is too much. We have to be mindful of that too. So these are some real challenges that we have, not just in Maine. These are national challenges. And in other areas, I would say maybe even worse. But if we continue to build for parking instead of for housing, we're going to have a serious housing problem. And this works toward addressing that and other core issues.
At its core, it really is expanding our workforce, ensuring that people can afford to stay in Maine, to pay their rent, and the only route really is building denser, scalable housing units. Um, Turning to another management of the workforce with our existing workforce is the implementation of the state's paid family medical leave program. I don't have to tell any business that it's very challenging to manage a workforce today, and the paid family medical leave program will become available for employees starting May of next year. I'm going to turn to Nate Cloutier, who's head of government relations for Hospitality Maine, to give a snapshot of what restaurants and hotels are experiencing as they prepare for this upcoming program. Nate?
Thank you, Patrick. Now that we've shifted past Memorial Day, this is really when the rubber hits the road for seasonal and tourism hospitality-based businesses. There's a general agreement and a harsh reality that restaurants and lodging establishments across the state make almost all of their income for the year within a 4-month span and then lose it the other 8. So making sure that we have policies that are mindful of not only our state's limitations, but the reality of how our seasonal economy operates. Hospitality and tourism support over 130,000 jobs, an impact of $16 billion on the state's economy. A neat stat is that for every 117 visitors to this state, it supports a job here in Maine. There are workforce challenges that have remained a lingering issue. The businesses that I talk with every day, from small mom and pop restaurants to the coastal inns, they say that they're having to do the same or more with less. And I'm sure you've all seen it. You go to a restaurant, the hours are reduced. What was open on a Monday a few years ago isn't open anymore. There's not as much seating. So it's important that we have policies that are mindful of these realities, of these changes. Businesses do want to be able to grow and hire. When an employee is out, and we'll see this with the paid family and medical leave program, this has been one of the key concerns from our sector, is that we don't really know what the impact and the extent of employee absences will have on the workplace. For your Main Street business, when a line cook is out, the owner is hopping on the line and is helping with prep, or is the chef for the day, or if the inn is missing their housekeeper, they are now making the sheets and doing the laundry. I mean, that type of flexibility is already happening now. And we're concerned that these policies, and especially in the paid family medical leave program, are not cognizant and do not acknowledge that those realities already exist, and that without some pragmatic reforms is likely only to be exacerbated. Our workforce
thank-
here is very important, and I appreciate the opportunity to hear from these experts today.
Well, thank you, Nate. Let's turn to a specific employer, Paul Bolin with Northern Light Health, who has been following this program as vice president at that organization. Paul.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. So again, my name is Paul Bolin. I'm Executive Vice President, Chief People and Administrative Officer with Northern Light Health. And as Nate talked about some of the issues that employers face, there continue to be other issues regarding paid family leave. As an employer, we want to make sure that Maine is an attractive destination state for people to come relocate to and become part of the workforce. Paid family leave, we think, is an important part of that. And I think that there's certainly appropriate examples of how paid family leave has been deployed in other states that have worked very well for both the business community, the workforce, as well as the state in the ability to administer and fund the program. The current program that we have has a number of flaws that I think will inhibit its ability to provide the level of benefit that was originally intended in the long term. And part of that funding, I think, is in the form of the payroll tax that have been charged already to businesses that will be opting out or have already been approved to have a private plan. Many large employers in the state have applied for, and others will continue to apply for, an exemption from the state's mandated plan, meaning that they're going to provide benefits equal or better to what the state is providing through their own plan. Northern Lights is an example of that. Other large employers are also doing very similar things. And the intent of that is the plans that we've derived over years of experience with our employees meet the needs of employees, but also are workable, encouraging people to return to work when they're able, but yet providing a safety net for income when they're not able to work because they're caring for themselves or a loved one. But all of those things are really at odds with the way the current legislation has been and law has been approved. There is legislation that's pending. LD 894, for example, provides a bipartisan support of additional amendments to the law that would make it more workable both for employees as well as employers, and provides a number of different details that would be consistent with what's been successful through years of experience in other states. And we certainly would encourage the legislature to support LD 894 in addition to other reforms that may come along to make sure that paid family leave is sustainable and workforce as well as employers.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to walk through a few of those specific provisions that the legislature has the opportunity to support and make this program work for employees, employers, and the state's economy. With us is Mindy Cattern, a shareholder at Littler Mendelson, to walk through a few key provisions. Mindy.
Thank you for this opportunity today. And first, I want to say it's been tremendously interesting listening to everyone's input. I think very, very helpful. And I want to highlight a few things with regard to LD 894 that are particularly important for the business community. The proposed amendment gives an employer the ability to determine whether an employee's requested leave will create an undue hardship on the business. And under those circumstances, leave can be rescheduled. For example, the amendment allows small businesses with fewer than 15 employees to determine that leave will create an undue hardship because of the size of the business. It will also allow seasonal businesses to determine that a leave will create an undue hardship during the height of the tourist season. It further allows employers to determine that a leave will constitute an undue hardship if more than 25% of its workforce is scheduled to be out at the same time. These are critical changes for the business community that will allow businesses to continue to operate and manage their labor needs. And I'm sure this is particularly important for the hospitality industry. Importantly, the amendment requires that an employee be employed for 120 days before being eligible to take leave. This amendment prevents an employee from taking leave before they start to work. The amendment also clarifies that employees are required to pay 50% of the premium for Maine paid family and medical leave. Nevertheless, employers may voluntarily elect to cover the employee portion of the premium. So these are simple fixes that will make the PFML system workable for both employers and employees. And we're hoping that there will be wide support for LD 894.
Well, those are simple but meaningful impacts for the business community. We're looking to move these revisions through amendments as soon as today. Ultimately, we need to make this program work as we have the outlook for our state's economy that is very concerning. One aspect that we've seen evolve in our state's ability to access new customers is digital tools. That's become a fundamental method at ensuring that your product can get into the customer that is interested in your product's viewpoint. And with us today to outline what we're very concerned about for legislation that was finalized and voted upon by the Judiciary Committee on Friday is Curtis Picard, who's President and CEO of the Retail Association of Maine. Curtis.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. Data privacy is an issue that Maine has been looking at for quite some time. And unfortunately, this year is very much a deja vu for me. It feels very much like last year. The Judiciary Committee last week advanced a bill that is once again very different than every other state. Although the majority of the framework on the majority report is somewhat similar to Maryland, in our opinion, law in Maryland, in our opinion, it goes even beyond that. So we're once again in a situation where Maine is trying to pass legislation on an important issue that will dramatically impact the business community and go further than any other state has gone. What we're supportive of a data privacy bill, but it's something that needs to strike a careful balance. And the minority report on LD 1822, which is the primary bill that's going to be debated in the House and the Senate, does that by adopting a notice and consent model for data collection. And what that means is the data that's collected is adequate, relevant, and reasonably necessary. So it's a existing model in 17 states now. Businesses know how to comply with it, and consumers know what to expect with it. And basically, from a consumer point of view, it gives consumers the ability to confirm whether or not certain businesses are processing your personal data. And it also enables you to obtain access to your personal data that is being processed by those businesses. You can correct inaccuracies with that data, and you can also delete your personal data provided by or obtained by those businesses. So basically, it gives consumers a lot of control in how their data is used, and that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for a model that is going to be in line with other states. It's no secret Maine is under a lot of challenges. You heard from Mr. Cloutier earlier before about the challenges facing our tourism businesses. So those businesses that rely on Canadian tourists typically are now having to find new markets for people to be attracted to Maine. And the way you do that is with targeted advertising. So we got to make sure that the data privacy law that gets passed in Maine is workable for businesses, especially small businesses, so they can adequately market their businesses and give consumers what they want.
Thank you, Curtis, for that overview. A lot of concern with the legislation, but really to put a finer point of its implications on the day-to-day methods at reaching customers. We have Dan Cashman, who is Director of Public Relations with Sutherland Weston to explain how this would impact Maine businesses if it were to become law. Dan?
Thank you, Patrick. At Sutherland Weston, we work with dozens of small businesses up and down the state, many of whom we do digital marketing for. And in a nutshell, one of the great things about digital marketing is something called retargeting. So if you are a small business, perhaps that sells sporting goods, you can have access to data through digital buys if somebody is maybe searching for a kayak on a larger sporting goods site's website, whether that's LL Bean or Dick's Sporting Goods, and the data will allow you to retarget those computers or phones with ads, knowing that the holder of that computer or phone is searching for a kayak. And it gives you a little bit of a competitive advantage as a small business to be able to spend your marketing dollars wisely against perhaps a big box store that has endless amounts of marketing dollars to be able to advertise nationally. The way this bill, the majority report is written, it would reduce the ability to do that, or even just do away with the ability to do that entirely, which would provide a competitive disadvantage for small businesses all around the state and just about every industry that's trying to spend their marketing dollars as well as they can. As somebody that's worked in this industry for 15 years, I can tell you the negative impact would be real if the majority report passes, and it would have a very damaging effect on small businesses throughout the state.
Thank you, Dan. Now is the time to be laser focused on ensuring that Maine continues to make economic progress. Maine has been resilient. We have had population in-migration. We have had state GDP exceed the national average. We're entering a new chapter, and the legislature really has an opportunity to focus on pro-growth strategies, expand housing production, ensure that our paid family medical leave works for the state's economy and its employees. And lastly, ensure that we maintain the utilization of digital tools and avoid any regulatory regime that puts Maine businesses at a competitive disadvantage. This is the time to be laser focused on ensuring continued economic growth for the state's economy. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions and appreciate you participating in today's media availability this morning.
Great, thank you, Patrick. So for the folks in the room who are from the media, do feel free to unmute and ask a question or put it in the chat and I will ask it for you. If there's talking over each other, then I'll pick one of you. But if you've been sitting in here and have any questions, we've talked a lot about housing, paid family medical leave. There's things that are good for businesses here in Maine. Ask away. And we'll see who's listening.
More of a clarifying question than anything else. Is the point of some of this reform to paid family leave? I know it was kind of talked about how most of the businesses during the tourist season, is it so that employers get the chance, if they wish, to kind of push that break back if it's not necessarily quote unquote an emergency to not the tourist season, so that they can have kind of the most amount of employees possible for that?
Thank you for that. And I'll see if Nate wants to add anything. But yes, we're a very seasonal economy, and the provision that we're looking at would allow a business to assert a hardship if it is during a busy season and not go through a regulatory process for approval. So effectively, for the summer season, a business could say, let's work on a leave plan that works for my business and works for you. Nate, do you want to add anything to that?
I'd just say importantly, it adds some clear examples in the law for businesses to be able to look at, to know when they could use an undue hardship. And something that is important to remember with undue hardship is that it doesn't let an employer deny leave entirely. It just forces the employer and the employee to work out a schedule that works for both parties.
Katie, I'll go. To step back and look at the state budget, if that's fine too. Have any of you kind of gotten any updates on where things may stand with kind of this final part? I know that's still kind of a TBD thing, but like Paul, I know there's a lot in there that could affect hospitals, health systems, Curtis, Nate, others. I know there's a lot of different things. And I'm happy to chat more with people after this as well if that's needed, but I wanted to ask now.
Paul, do
I
you
don't
want
have,
to jump in?
sure, I don't have a specific on the current status of the budget. I know right now, the delay because of budget, the passage was delayed through the legislative process. There's about a $24 million cash delay that Northern Light Health has already incurred as a result of deferring payments on Maine Care for services that have already been provided. And so, there's a number of challenges in Maine's healthcare industry, and I think we've seen very, very significant examples of that in the last several months. And delaying payment, and we don't have a guarantee of when we'll receive payment. At what pace? Is it a lump sum? Is it over time? Is it we don't have that forecast. And at this point, those challenges add to the already difficult environment to provide sustainable health care throughout the state. So that continues to provide a significant anxiety point for us, as well as other employers in the healthcare sector.
I can add a little bit onto what Paul said. Another thing we're following in these budget discussions is the pharmacy tax proposal. That idea has seemed to be wildly unpopular. It got a unanimous ought not to pass in the budget from the Health and Human Services Committee, but of course everything rests with the Appropriations Committee at this point. So we continue to touch base with people on it. We believe that they understand the challenges with doing something like that. But Paul's right, making sure our healthcare providers get paid and compensated. Adding a pharmacy tax is not helpful. We're also keeping our eye out on any other potential taxes. The governor's proposed budget also included a significant increase in the tobacco tax, which would put us out of pace with neighboring New Hampshire, which would really end up driving sales there and not really getting the financial impact I think Maine is anticipating here.
I would just add that the best way to address the state's budget is through pro-growth policies. We have seen our tourism industry hugely important for the state's economy and our budget. Right now, there's a moratorium for hotels in Bar Harbor and in Portland. We've shut down the cruise ship industry effectively in Bar Harbor. And also, we have municipalities that are denying housing project after housing project. These all add up to have consequences on our state's budget. The best way to really ensure that we have a budget that will work and be balanced is ensuring that we have economic policies. And that includes unlocking housing, making sure our paid family medical leave program is going to work for businesses. And lastly, that we have digital tools to attract customers who will pay the sales tax for our state. So it really is important that we focus.
If I may, so I was looking recently, many of you know I served in the legislature 12 years. Okay. So when I started in 2012, I think our budget from Paul LePage at that time, Pat, I think you might have been part of that administration or the one after, but the budget was somewhere around 6.5, 6.3 billion, something like that. I mean, in that 12-year period of time, now it's ballooned to nearly $12 billion. And it took us from 1820, when we gained our statehood, until, let's call it almost 2020, to get to 6.5 billion, and then just 12 short years to double that. This is not sustainable. And we're going to have more people living here, more vibrant business economy to support this, or else we're on a train headed to a disaster.
So we gave you an earful there, Billy. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It was helpful. And yeah, Matt, I was going to say, if as a former state senator, if you had heard anything from current colleagues, then I'm happy, but I don't expect you to necessarily know what's going on right now too. So
No, I'm not in the club anymore, buddy.
thank you.
Thanks, Billy, for asking that. Last call, because I'm looking at the time. Any other press folks have any last questions before we wrap up? All right, Patrick, I'm going to look to you to close us out.
No, thank you. Ultimately, there are so many consequential decisions before the legislature as they enter the last few weeks. It's imperative that we have an economic focus through these decisions. And moreover, that we focus on the policies that will enable economic growth for businesses to support the Maine economy. That is the way to address our state budget. That is the way to improve our affordability and ultimately ensure that we build on the success of the Maine economic growth of the last few years. Time is now to unlock housing, make reforms to the paid family medical leave program, and ensure that we can maintain modern digital tools to reach customers. Thank you again for joining us today and appreciate your attention to these matters.